Good morning, everybody. It's good to see all of you today. How's everybody doing? Man, I'm waiting for that cooler weather. You guys are more animated in cooler weather. Do you know that? It's like talking to people in the sauna when you're in this room. Hey, how's it going? Good, me too. We are continuing our series in the book of Acts of the Apostles. And if you can think back, if you weren't here, I'll fill you in, but if you can think back to last week, something amazing was occurring. And what that was a man who was a rising star among a group of people in the whole world of Judaism out of Jerusalem, named Saul. Saul of Tarsus is how he's called. Was going to Damascus, was going to take out people who had become Christians, was going to bring them back under arrest to Jerusalem to stand trial with the hope that if they were convicted, they would be put to death. Last week, the week before that, I called him an ancient leader of ISIS. That's just what he was like. He wanted to eradicate people who thought differently like he did. And just like ISIS today, ISIS predominantly goes after Muslims, not after Christians. Because Muslims who would not believe the way they believe are thought to be the worst people on earth. Well, in Paul's mind, Saul, as he was called, any Jew who would cling to this false, failed Jewish leader named Jesus and call him Messiah was someone who was the worst person on earth. Surely God was against that person. So he goes, he has this experience where he meets the resurrected Christ. He appears to him, he says, "What are you doing? What do you do? Why are you doing this?" And he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm Jesus, the one you're persecuting. You think you're going after people, you're really attacking the very Messiah you've been waiting for your whole life." So you can read all of that in the beginning of chapter 9. Now, from that moment, his life has been flipped upside down. Hello? Am I? Okay. We're going to talk more about that in a moment. But the story today is fascinating because here's what's going on. This whole conversion has taken place. He's in Damascus, which is a huge, huge city, even in that day. And he suddenly is finding that people are now trying to kill him, just as he was going to try and kill the other believers, the other Christians. And so some Christians help him escape out of the city at night by lowering him down from a wall where he can get away, because the gates are being watched night and day. City gates in those days were opened in the morning. People would come in. They were often closed at night to keep out enemies. Those gates are being watched, so he has to go out another way. Now, the story I want to read right now, see up on the screen or in your notes, is what happens in the story that Luke gives us immediately after that. Verse 25, he's lowered out of this window, out of the wall, and he escapes. That's what happens. Verse 25, he escapes from Damascus. Now let's look at verse 26. When he came to Jerusalem, he tried to join the disciples, but they were all afraid of him, because they think he wants to kill them, not believing that he really was a disciple. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles. He told them how Saul on his journey had seen the Lord, and that the Lord had spoken to him, and how in Damascus he had preached fearlessly in the name of Jesus. He's a different person now. So Saul stayed with them and moved about freely in Jerusalem, speaking boldly in the name of the Lord. He talked and debated with the Grecian Jews. Those were Jews that were born, raised outside of Judea. But they tried to kill him. Now remember, the Grecian Jews were the ones who killed Stephen, the very first martyr. When the brothers learned of this, they took him down to Caesarea, a seaport, and sent him off to Tarsus, his home city. Then the church throughout Judea, Galilee, and Samaria enjoyed a time of peace. It was strengthened and encouraged by the Holy Spirit. It grew in numbers, living in the fear of the Lord. Now that's the story as Luke gives it to us. And what Luke is trying to present is how God, in effect, starting from chapter 1 of the Acts of the Apostles, when Jesus is saying you're going to have the Spirit, and the Spirit is going to cause you to be witnesses for me, he's painting a picture of how the gospel goes throughout the world. That is what he's doing in the book of Acts. What he doesn't pick up on, Luke, the author, is what I want to talk about today. Because it turns out that between verse 25 of chapter 9 and verse 26, which we just read, there is a 3-year gap that he doesn't write about. A 3-year gap. And in that 3 years of time, from the time that Saul escapes Damascus and goes to Jerusalem, the story we just read about, something occurs. And it's very human. It's very deep. It's something that every person who wants to follow Jesus will go through at some time. The Bible talks about it from beginning to end. We see it in the lives of people like Moses, Elijah the prophet. We see it in the life of Jesus himself. What's going on, I can describe in one word. What happens between verse 25 and 26 that Luke doesn't tell us about is this: solitude. Solitude. What Paul tells us, as he writes some years later, writes to the region, the Roman province of Galatia, writes a letter that would be called an encyclical, meaning they would send it around. We know it as the book of Galatians. He tells his own story of that period of time. Now remember, Luke is an author. He's painting a picture. He's telling us and Theophilus, how did the gospel go from Jesus to the whole world? What happened? How did Jesus make that happen? What Paul, Saul, whichever name you want to use for him, tells us is something entirely unknown in the book of Acts. Now I just want to read it to you up on the screen. In the context of this book, he's writing to people who have given their life to Jesus, but have then been told there's a follow-up, and that follow-up is you must now follow the Jewish laws. So every man, every woman must stick to certain things. All the men must be circumcised. All the women must follow certain rituals if you want to be with God in his kingdom someday. And Saul writes to say, that's absolutely backward. If you have come into the Father through Jesus Christ, then that's all you need. There's no more than that. And so he writes to this region, several churches in this area, to say to them, the gospel I'm telling you about, that it's Jesus plus nothing, was given to me by God himself. Now that's the context. Look what he says. But when God, who set me apart from birth and called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son to me. Now he's talking about chapter 9 of Acts, when Jesus appears to him on the road to Damascus when he's going to arrest Christians and bring them to Jerusalem to stand trial for blasphemy. That's the experience he's talking about. To reveal his Son in me, so that I might preach among the Gentiles, I did not consult any man, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to see those who were apostles before I was. Well, what did you do? Because in Luke, it looks like, or Acts, it looks like he went from Damascus to Jerusalem. What did happen? He tells us, I went immediately into Arabia. I'll explain that in a minute. And later returned to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Peter and stayed with him 15 days. Now here's what's happening. You have a man who is a rising star. He is becoming very quickly the leader of all of the Pharisaical party. He will be one of the most prominent, well-known Jews of his time. He will take the seat, the professor's teaching seat of Gamaliel, the great teacher of Israel. And he's filled with zeal for what he believes. So much so that he gets letters from the high priests to actually go to foreign cities and arrest people and bring them back in chains. He believes he's serving God. And suddenly, as he's going to do this to this huge urban population in Damascus, the very failure, the false Messiah, the one that he's going to destroy his followers, that one appears to him and says, "You've got it wrong. I'm God." His whole life flips upside down. I don't know if you've ever had an experience like that, where everything you believed suddenly was called into question. But that's what hits him. What I do know about you is that all of us hit those moments where we have to step back and say, what is happening here? What really matters here? What really is going on here? God is doing something. What is he doing in me right now? It seems in our society that we crave busyness, that we crave noise, that we crave activity, that I cannot be detached for 1 second from everybody else. So thank heaven I'm wired to them through my cell, through the internet, through some device that I have. I now can know exactly what you're having for dinner because you're telling me on Facebook, right? Now, I'm not going to go after Facebook again. I'm just making the point. So we're constantly being bombarded with information. We're constantly connected to the whole world around us. We have our news feeds. We know what's going on moment by moment, day by day. And we like it that way. Why? Well, it appears, and psychology is discovering this more and more, that we are afraid to be alone. We're afraid. Not because we think something will happen, but because we're afraid to not be in the flow of things. I might be left out. We're afraid, even, psychology is telling us, of our own thoughts, of our own memories. We're afraid to be alone, to just consult with our own soul and see what's really there. To think through life, to face the hard questions. It's easier to play the role of the ostrich with a head in the sand and to just not think about the realities of my life or the world around me. Easier to hear something in my news feed, in my 2 paragraphs, because that's all I can tolerate reading, and say, well, it must be their fault that this is going bad. We just need to eliminate those people. We need more rules. We need more laws. We need more this. We need more that. And the only time I really seem to step away from all of it is if I drop my cell phone in water. Or some distraction happens. My internet goes down. And then I just cannot stand it. Can I just say, in America and most of the Western world, we have a severe disease. It's no wonder that with all of the unbelievable technology we have now, people are less and less and less knowledgeable, secure, happy. I tell my kids about what it was like when I was growing up, and they don't know how I could have possibly endured it. One of my kids said to me one day, "Dad," and he was not being funny. He'd learned something in school, and so he wanted to know more about it. And he said, "Dad, what was it like during the Civil War?" And I said, "You know I wasn't born then, right?" And he said, "Were you born kind of around that time?" And I said, "Go to your room." I didn't say that. He had learned about that time. So he wanted to talk to somebody who was there and thought it was me. This is not meant to be overly heavy, but the reality is that what we see in Saul's life, not saying, "Hey, this is a whole new thing here. Man, I better go get some information. I better find out what's going on. I better talk to the experts. I better read some books on this. I better get some information going on here. Man, I'm going to go up here and I'm going to get connected to these guys because these guys, the apostles, they seem to be the ones who have all of the information. That's who I want to be associated with. That's why." He escapes. You know what Arabia is? It's not Saudi Arabia, although that would have been included in those ancient boundaries. Very nebulous. No one knows for sure. We just know there were two things there. There was a lot of desert, and therefore there was a lot of empty space. There weren't many Christians there, if any, at that time. There weren't a lot of Jewish communities there. Not synagogues every place like the cities he will go to. There's a whole lot of nothing. What he does know is there, and this is important to the whole story, is a place that was very special in his heart. And that is Mount Sinai, where Moses received the law. In his mind, Mount Sinai is a place where people can go to reconnect with God and figure out what's going on. He doesn't just want to be alone. He wants to be alone with God. Just like Jesus would often withdraw to be in prayer with the Father. Just like Elijah, after his big victory on Mount Carmel, taking out all of those prophets that were against God, he escapes and he goes down into the desert near Sinai to just be alone with God. You see it over and over and over and over. And I know our response to this is, "Yeah, but you don't know how busy I am." Right? Right. And this is not a, you must carve out 2.5 hours every day. What it is simply saying that solitude is a rich, important aspect of walking with God. Very important. Now, what happens in solitude? I'm going to give you a couple of things very quickly. Why solitude? Why did Saul seek it? Why did Jesus seek it? Why do we see Moses going away to be with God? Why did Elijah go away? What's going on? Here's the first reason for solitude. First reason for solitude is simply to separate from the distractions of my everyday life. Just what I was talking about. To just get away from all of the things I have to do or think I have to do or think I want to do. All of the pressures of everyday life. Now, solitude for Paul in this case was a couple of years. Your solitude may just be half an hour. But the whole idea is I just want to separate, to break that tie, to get away. I'm going to actually have the courage to turn off my cell phone, to turn off my computer, to set down the iPad or the tablet. I'm just going to pretend for 30 minutes or maybe a day or maybe a weekend. Those don't exist. I'm just going to break that off. What the rest of the world is doing, they can do perfectly well without my involvement. I'm just going to step away from all of that distraction, from all of that busyness, from those 10 million messages the Western world receives every single day as we're connected to the world around us. Most of them just trying to get you to believe something or buy something. I'm going to cut away from all of that and just step back. To separate. Saul's whole purpose is to separate. He needs to get away, so he separates. The second thing is this. Once I've separated, and it may take a while, but once I've separated, something begins to occur, and it is the second reason for solitude, and it's this. Solitude because I want to rest and relax. Mentally, emotionally, physically. When you read the Elijah story, you see that when he escapes, God does something. He's down in this area, in Sinai area. He's escaping. He's in solitude. He's got nothing to eat. He's run away. He's afraid for no reason, really. But in his mind, he's got justifiable cause to get away. God feeds him. Brings food his way. Says, there's a little stream. Drink from that. And he does. And then you know what he does? Something very spiritual. He lays down and he goes back to sleep. How can you serve God with any kind of strength when you're taking a nap? But he's doing exactly what the Father wants him to do at that minute because he is depleted mentally, emotionally, physically. He's just depleted. Why do we always say, man, I just need to veg for a while? Is it because we're lazy? No. It's because we carry lots of stress. Doctors have known for 3 decades that the primary reason people check into hospitals began with some kind of intense stress that brought on a sickness, a disease, a mental concern. Stress, it just eats at you. And sometimes the best thing I can do once I separate is just to sleep. You know how we used to call it a quiet time? I'm going to go have a quiet time. Well, maybe sometimes your quiet time could be just you taking a nap and just letting your body rest. God can still run the world if you're taking a nap. You guys are so quiet today. Taking a nap, all right. Amen. You'll pay for that later. This sermon just got kicked into high gear. It's going to go 3 hours now. Here's why I can rest and relax. Because when I separate and those messages, all of that connectedness begins to just go away. I suddenly realize God can take care of my kids without me, my friends, my school, my spouse, that He can perfectly handle my world without me being involved in it. In fact, sometimes my over-involvement messes things up. Suddenly what happens is I get a new understanding that God has got my back. That God can take care of me okay. That He loves my wife more than I ever could. And she'll be okay. That my kids are in His hands. And while being a dad means there are things I need to do, if I was to drop off the edge of the earth tomorrow, it wouldn't be the end of them. Because they still have Him, who is more capable of caring for them than I am. That my job, that my family, that my neighborhood, my friendships, my community, my country, my world, that all of that will go on when I'm dead. and that it's okay because it's in God's hands. Do you hear that? Your kids, your spouse, your relationships, your job. And so it's okay for you to step back. And when I'm in solitude, that begins to clarify a little bit. And I say, you know what, God? You got this. The most famous sermon ever preached. It's a Sermon on the Mount preached by Jesus. You see it in Matthew 5 through 7. When you read through that sermon, you suddenly begin to understand that Jesus is saying something. And what it is relax. Relax. You mourn, and so you think life is awful. No, just relax. You feel broken in spirit, like you don't measure up. Just relax. People are coming down on you for what you believe or what you do, and so you think you must be doing something wrong or the world must be going to heck in a hammer. Just relax. You don't know what God feels about you because you don't think you've been doing the right religious thing. Just relax. Relax. The world feels upside down to you. Relax. Just relax. And you read through this sermon and you hear Jesus saying stuff like, do you see that bird? The Father takes care of that bird. And if He'll take care of that bird, He'll take care of you. Is that flower? Well, when the sun's all the way up in this Palestinian heat, that flower's going to turn brown and die. But look at how beautiful it is. Because the Father made it beautiful. Because He loves His creation. And so if He'll take care of the flower that's just going to be dead by 3 o'clock, don't you think He will take care of you? And then He says stuff like, the hairs of your head are even numbered. He knows every intimate detail. You are okay, you're cleared, you're authorized, you're safe to just relax. It will be okay. Now, when I step back from the distractions and I find myself beginning to rest and relax in the Father's care, then the third thing happens. The third reason for solitude. Because now I am in a good place to listen. Not to the millions of messages that tell me what I should be, what I should buy, how I should live, how my spouse should respond to me, how my kids should act, what they should be learning here, what I should be doing there, all of the things I should be doing at church. All of those millions of messages, I now can listen. And what I listen to is to the voice of Jesus Himself. I am now in a place to listen to Jesus. To listen to Him speak into my spirit about me, about my life and the things going on in my life, about the world around me, things I'm concerned about. And we all have truckloads of concerns all the time. I can't hear that voice when I'm busy trying to fix those things. When I'm weighed down with the concerns of the world and think I got to stay attached and connected and keep the ball rolling. I can listen to Jesus when I step back and say, God's got it. Here I am. What do you want to say? See, Saul goes down to Arabia because he needs to get away. He goes down to Sinai where God spoke to His people centuries ago to hear what the voice of the Father would say to him about his experience. He doesn't have the road to Damascus experience and then go, got it. God just downloaded this right into me, and I'm ready to roll, baby. He has this experience. He spends a few weeks or months going to the Jews and saying, hey, you know what? I was totally wrong about this. Look, it says here in the Torah. I totally misunderstood that. That's what he does. But it's so overwhelming, he just gets away. And he begins to listen. Many commentators believe that it was in Arabia where God began to spell out for him that it is Jesus and Jesus alone that brings me into a relationship with the Father. Not Jesus and circumcision, not Jesus and following the 10 Commandments, not Jesus and doing some religious rituals or regulations or some kind of religious rite. It is Jesus alone. So when he leaves Arabia, things have been sorted out. Now notice he wasn't in Arabia for 3 days. It was a couple of years. But he's ready now. He's ready for the next step. One of my favorite people in church history is a man named Charles Spurgeon. He became a Christian at 16, started preaching at 17. By the time he was 18, he was hired at the largest church in London. It was about 1845. He became so popular over the next 2 decades that the city of London, which was this huge urban area as it is today, actually rerouted all of their horse-drawn carriages and trolleys to get people from all around London, which is huge, to his church building. Because everybody wanted to hear this guy talk. They would stand on their trolleys, and this was what they would say: "Over the water to Charlie, over the water to Charlie," which everyone knew meant, "We'll take you over the Thames River to hear Charles Spurgeon preach." He's called by church historians the Prince of Preachers. Late in his life, he said this: "If I had another 20 years of ministry, I would spend 15 of those years simply preparing in solitude, so that I could have 5 years full of the power of God." I'm going to close with this. Look what Jesus says. Jesus invites you to relax, invites you to trust, invites you to believe, invites you to be with him. He says this up on the screen: "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." That's just what Saul did, and just what he invites us to do. "Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Doesn't that sound inviting? Appealing? He doesn't say get on the religious treadmill. Get busy. Start doing stuff. Let's do something around here. He says, if you're weary, step away from that. Be yoked to me, which is an invitation to be with him in relationship, in discipleship. And learn from me, meaning he wants to personally teach you, which is a wonderful thing. Do you know why? Because he doesn't come on like the general giving you your marching commands. He's humble. He's gentle. He speaks to you as God spoke to Elijah way back when, in that still, small voice, whispering into your spirit, encouraging you to trust, to believe, to let go of trying to control things in favor of embracing him in a new life that's full of love and joy and peace. He closes with this: my yoke fits perfectly, meaning the relationship you have with me will feel like you were born for it when you begin to walk in this relationship. And the burden I give you is light. Simply meaning that I'll take all of that off your shoulders, and the burden you will have will simply be to rest in me, to relax in me, to learn from me, to grow in relationship with me. Doesn't mean you'll quit your job and, go live on a mountainside. It simply means that life will now be different. I'll experience differently because the Father's teaching me. He's guiding me. He's lifting burdens off me. But it's not going to happen if I refuse solitude. It's not going to happen if I want God to fit into the gaps somewhere while I'm busily running my life at my timing. It's only going to happen if I have the courage to disconnect, even for a little time, and go someplace where I can say, Jesus, here I am. If nothing else, if all I do is just close my eyes and rest, that's enough. Jesus didn't call you to religious obligation. He called you to new life. That's right.